So, we're going to be a bit more practical. As we said this afternoon, sort of getting a little bit more hands-on about the how that goes with the why. I first should mention that sadly Emma's not here from With Not For. She helped us with the ideas. She was on the original discussions. Her daughter's not well, and so she's not joining us. So, and unfortunately, that was also part, really, of how we were connecting in on the story. The With Not For, you'd have heard earlier on from Brooke, who's connected to With Not For as well, and we were going to try and put those threads through, but we can do that between us. So, I think just to set a context, I think I was talking to Caroline probably way back when, 10 months ago, about the how bits and what's difficult about making things accessible. What is it that's difficult about making things accessible? And one of the things I think that we're going to talk about is what to do at each stage. So an accessibility throwaway would be you do it as soon as you can. Do it at the beginning. And do it all the way through, and don't do it at the end. And, you know, we're used to saying shift left in the accessibility community, do things earlier in the project process. I think probably the challenge with that, both for ourselves, but also people outside the accessibility world is, okay, what shall I do? What is actually helpful to do at which particular stage of the program? And also, we're focusing at the moment on video. We're looking at ads, but actually accessibility obviously is much broader than that. And there'll be different things you need to do in different pieces of the project, depending on whether you're putting something out on paper, whether it's going onto a website, whether it's a video that's going to be shared on YouTube, for example. So what we wanted to talk through was some of that workflow stuff, the practical how stuff. And I'll start with you, Caroline. If you could tell us a bit about what your role is, but also where you see these some of the obvious tips that you give people about what to do at the beginning, what to do at the middle, and what you do at the end.
Sure. So I'm Caroline Desrousier, founder and CEO of Scribely, and we are a media accessibility solutions company that focuses on the accessibility requirements related to images, video, and audio. And we kind of started out as this company that's providing support for writing alt text, writing audio description, and really have evolved to more organizational consulting and looking at accessibility workflows. So you want to have alt text for your images, you want to have audio description for your videos, but how is that done? Actually mapping out the entire process. What systems are you using? Where do technologies come into play? How are you passing, preserving, organizing all of this data? Really, it's data, it's information. How are you storing that in your systems? Because so many times we have these different channels of communication, and we're trying to make accessibility happen at the very, very end of the process. And then it just kind of, it disappears. It's out there in the world. Everyone is responsible for it at your organization, and that's really not sustainable. So we focus on how can we really refine the process, the creative process, in ensuring that accessibility does actually happen at the right points. And then how are we bringing that information back into the organization and learning from it to improve the quality of our descriptive content over time.
And some of that, when we were talking about, say, the audio description, some of it's about planning the content before you do the audio description, of course, that the content has a sort of cadence and a story that you can tell in audio description. They haven't got to come galloping in with loads of things happening.
Absolutely. Audio description is a creative endeavor, right? So sometimes it has to go back and forth between teams. And there's that collaboration that happens. That's how we truly get to the level of quality that we should be aiming for. So thinking of it as it must happen at the end and must just happen with this one team. And then I'm not going to worry about it is not the right approach. You won't see your organization excelling at these accessibility requirements.
And even more so, I guess, in alt text, which is obviously your bread and butter in the sense of what you've been doing, and the difference between what a robot can write, a difference between what a human can write, a difference about whether it's useful and relevant. All of that stuff has got to be planned as part of the process, that the right person is thinking about the right information at the right time to be shared at the end of the process.
Absolutely. And if we can bring alt text back to the teams that are involved in creative, involved in products, they have a different understanding of these images, right? So we need to be writing alt text at many different stages across the process and then having that information stored. So people that are downstream from those workflows can actually access the descriptions that were written by people that are very close to the content. Right? They're not guessing anymore. They're not doing their best. And that really helps reduce that fear and that uncertainty that comes along with, I'm publishing this content. I'm responsible for this content. I don't want to embarrass the company that I work for, and I want to make sure that I get this right. It reduces that fear because you're hearing from your colleagues upstream that have already described these images visually.
And then a final question, I guess, is you're talking about the quality of what's done. The words are correct, but presumably there's an efficiency gain or there's a productivity gain in some way if you get this right through the process. You're not endlessly going backwards and forwards. Is that how you sell your stuff to your clients? I assume there's a whole gain in that way that they hadn't thought of.
Absolutely. And thinking about how organizations are utilizing generative AI, there's so much that can be learned from the way that we're describing images to help improve a first pass at alt text. But it starts from actually working out these workflows that enable it to happen and making sure that this important metadata makes it back into your system so that you can continuously evolve and create even better quality content.
Sure, thank you. Craig, you're at HSBC. You're working in the accessibility team. Where do you fit into the workflows? How often do you say, you should have come to me a long time ago?
Less often than I used to.
Yeah.
So, everything is iterative improvement. We generally are thinking in a far better place than we used to. So I'm one of the senior accessibility managers here at HSBC. And our role is to actually make sure anything we release, either publicly to our staff, actually meets the criteria. And, if we just take the example of Caroline, when it comes down to publishing elements with alternative text, it's, our job is to actually govern and make sure everything meets the criteria. But, the empowering, once again, shifting left and making sure that I could write an alternative description for an image at the end, if we're involved at the end. But it might not be the best because I don't necessarily understand the purpose and the context for what is created. I can go in there and describe the image. I can go in there and describe what I believe the image conveys. But really, that should have been responsibility of the people who understood the purpose of this document, who's its intended audience. Because remember, with alternative text, you're not necessarily describing the image, you're conveying what the image is intended to convey. And at the end of the day, I may not know that. And, it gets lost. So, just bringing it back, yes, we do get involved at the end, but and part of that is when that happens, we go back to the teams, we understand why it got to that stage, and then it's about empowering people to, if this is coming through, ask the questions, and bringing it back round to workflow is understanding who's responsible at what stage, and if things aren't being done, speak up.
And so part of that, I guess, is trying to put the right gatekeeping in place within the project processes as well, that things don't go through from one team to another or from one stage to another, just to make sure that there are relatively simple guidelines people can follow to say, don't pass this on until this is completed.
Yeah. Having a clear policy, having clear checkpoints, having a clear understanding over who's responsible for each stage is actually critical. But also recognizing when something doesn't work, being able to speak up and actually say, am I the best person to do this? And actually have that open conversation.
So, Doug, you're in the, enviable, unenviable position of being here to talk about PDFs.
Yes.
Hey.
Most popular content type in the world, yes. Thank you.
Could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about the work that you do?
Yes, I'm Doug Koppenhofer. I run the Center of Excellence at Crawford Technologies, in charge of sales and marketing and product direction.
And tell us a bit about the work that you're doing and how this workflow stuff fits in terms of the unenviable task, obviously.
Yeah, I'd like to start asking in the audience, have you ever actually worked with a PDF to make it accessible? Can I see a show of hands? On behalf of the community, I apologize, first of all. So I think, I was so drawn to this topic because workflow can really be the force multiplier in how you address enterprise scale PDF accessibility requirements. And the key for us is to have that conversation early on with the teams that are creating the PDFs, and to know that although you might not be able to fix every PDF immediately at creation time, at least be aware of the fact that you're creating them and put them into a process that can make them accessible. And so I think we see workflow as a way of, essentially moving the onus off of a center of excellence that has very few people and tons of documents, and shifting it left into a process that can be repeated and essentially do this at scale.
How much of that is winning hearts and minds, and how much of it is actually no, that's not done. You've got to send it back. There's a little bit of carrot and stick, I guess, in those processes.
It's a little bit of both, right? We hope to have strong advocates and champions within the enterprise that can help, with the stick part of it, and then the carrot is showing people the results of their efforts, right? The fact that it is actually easy to do this, and when they see the results, it tends to.
And I guess equally with the stick at the moment, there's big change with the EAA that we're aware of. I mean, that's a big stick, isn't it, from the point of view of risk and compliance? How much does that figure already in the conversations you're having with people who may not have done it before? It's
underlying every conversation. We're finding it as time goes on. It's really, in the U.S. we've seen that litigation has gotten, the horse out of the barn. I think, this June 2025 date is really helping broaden that conversation as well. But again, it's hollow if we don't show people that they can actually have an impact on the people that they're working with and their customers. So you have to have both elements, I think, involved.
And from the point of view of the people you work with, are there people who are more receptive than others? And the legal team's always the first people to say, yes, we should do it. And, exactly. And then the production teams go, hang on a minute.
Well, it's funny. Yes, you'll see legal and compliance people involved. But very often we'll find a champion or a coach somewhere who really gets it, right? And it's really key to find that personality within the organization that can convey the impact. So, and I think increasingly what we're seeing, it's about ROI. It really is about, the fact that if you can deploy something that's faster and better and cheaper, that's really going to win the day, no matter what. And I think that's going to be, having tangible results, metrics are really key.
I know it's not just PDFs you work with. I wonder how big a part PDFs are going to continue to play. That's another question about PDFs, isn't it? What's your take on that for the next few years, I guess?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think that they're going away. I think there are some industries where they're really critical. I mean, financial services, healthcare, legal. It is essentially a way of providing a self-contained piece of evidence of your communication with the client or the member. And so it's going to be around, and so I think we've got to deal with it. Now, in some cases, it just makes more sense to do things in HTML, honestly, than PDF. There are a lot of forms that could be easily done in HTML, and we actually advocate for that because we're not, we have plenty of work in the PDF world. But there are better ways to do some of that information.
So coming back onto the creative process, Caroline, because I think that's something that you've also got, I'm aware that without Emma in the room, that's one of the things she was going to talk about. So your experience within creative industries generally, how receptive are people to talking about that stuff at the beginning? Because Emma was telling us about working at the edit stage and the very early briefing stage. I think that's some of this experience you have, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that there needs to be more work done to bring it back into the creative process, truly, because you see a lot of kind of pointing of fingers. When I talk to organizations, talk to many different departments, they all seem to say, alt text isn't my job. Audio description isn't my job. You should talk to creative. And then you talk to the creative team. They say, you should talk to production. I don't think we do that. And really, it doesn't seem to have a home anywhere. But I believe that the best way is actually with every team. Every team should be involved with this because they all provide a unique perspective to it. Just think of the way that copy is created, right? And the folks involved there. That might be a good place to start. If you're writing copy for a page or for a campaign, then you could also be writing copy for images because the alt text should have that same brand voice that's pulled all the way through as well. So that should be a natural part of that creative process. But I think that kind of functional role that they're playing, they might be missing that. Yeah.
I'm thinking about also because I know we're talking about AI. Can you measure the impact of getting the alt text right and the descriptions? What's the tangible difference when you do get it right that you see?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the big thing with AI right now is that it's struggling to describe images in context, and we're getting the best it can do. So we need to work to teach AI how to describe images. And the way that we do that is we help it understand what is context in different scenarios, and also just the context of the brand. There's so many different forms of context. So just asking it to do its best, I think we can expect the level of quality that we're experiencing right now. But get organized with your image data, and I think that you'll see AI models improving over time.
So the learning will come from within the best practice and so on.
Yeah, but only if you're creating that process where you're actually bringing the data back in. If you are continuing to just publish it and then not collect it back into a centralized repository, then you'll probably be in the same place. But that's something really valuable. And it's also a way to sell accessibility as not just for accessibility purposes. It's also for data and for improving that process as well.
And Craig, I know that Marley's made much of the accessibility training resources that you have and you share. How much of your work is sharing those resources into teams and enabling people to learn about the impact of things like bad or text, for example, or where it is?
Well,
do you do that advocacy stuff as well?
Very, very much so. As Doug said, as a small, central team in a large organisation, you have to share that knowledge. And obviously Molly's spoken about our Train 1000, and we're very much, we believe any knowledge should actually be shared, and there's no point hoarding it. But once again, I'm going to go back to that word empower. Empowering and actually skilling the teams, from our developers, our content authors, our testers, etc., where we come across a problem or where we identify trends of information, we do actually want to try and go in there, identify what the problem is, and actually upskill. Internally, we run weekly training courses on different subjects for our teams. They're just available to drop in at any time. We do ad hoc training as it's required, as elements are coming up. And we never want to be the people who are, bring it to us, we'll fix it for you. As a last line of resort, we want to be, give it a go, bring it to us, we'll tell you if you're good, we tell you where you can improve, and we want to get to the point where we're just going, oh, that's great, yeah, all I've got to do is, right, I approve, next, I approve, next, okay, need some work, let's find out why, I approve, next. It's all about, once again, I'm saying, it's going back to the workflow, understanding each team actually knows what their responsibility is. And also, if there is a problem, to speak up as well, because no process is perfect.
And I think JC may have mentioned this, but how much work did you do on brand guidelines around because I'm just thinking another thing we haven't mentioned is color contrast, which is such an obvious challenge, whether it's in a video or a document or online or whatever. How much of that sort of influence have you had in terms of change?
So obviously, our accessibility program has been running for a number of years. Being placed in brand, as Jonathan Katzman said, we work very closely with them. We've set the standards. We have set corporate standards. And wow, is there accessibility call-outs on everything now. Right. Even to the point of, our alternative text, our positioning of text, our use of photography, our use of the colour red, for too much, too little. It just goes into insane depth. Our social media use, the positioning, every single design update, accessibility is involved. And, we are an integral part. And it is a partnership because maybe you turn around and go, we admit that looks great, but no. And they turn around and go, are you sure? And it's like, yeah. And it's not an argument. It's like, okay, how about this? Okay, that works. Color contrast. And on making teams understand that if we do take color contrast, if it's easier for people to see, it's easier for everybody to see. They're going to see it at a glance. It's going to be clear. It's not just the accessibility audience and the crowd you're going for. You make something clearer and simpler. You make it clearer and simpler for everybody.
And you've been here a few years now. That's relatively new, or do you think that's always been embedded because you came from the brand perspective? How much of change have you seen?
So everything is a journey. And, I've been at HSBC 3.5 years. And when I joined, we had policies and procedures in place. Maybe they weren't as clear as they could have been, or, maybe they were open to interpretation. And, it's just having those conversations and making teams, it's not an argument when we need to make a change. That battle's been fought and won before I joined, which is fantastic. The question is, okay, what do we need to do? How long do we need to do it? Do we need to pull what we've already done? What's the severity? And yeah, being engaged in the conversation, not as an afterthought, but integrally is world changing.
That's interesting, because I guess the workflow question, we were talking about who's responsible for planning the workflow. But that's like a governance question you've raised there, isn't it? Another sort of buzzword that we hear. In your experience, Doug, do you see something coming down from on top? Do you see something coming up from below? Where's the best mix of those two things, do you think, in terms of the governance stuff in particular, I think?
It typically comes from an advocate within the organization and from on top. If you get those two things to happen, then you can develop other champions or advocates that can really push this along. If it comes only from on top, it's difficult to actually get there, I think. It's really key to have somebody who is a centralized point of focus, I think. And having executive sponsorship, HSBC's program here is very important, I think. That's the perfect mix.
Yeah. And how often is it somebody in brand? I guess that wouldn't be the obvious place you'd look, would it? Or would you find that is more often not?
What we see often is marketing leading the charge, because they see the ROI, and they, referring back to the earlier conversations today, I think that's really where the rubber meets the road. If you can tie it to a business case, a justification, and that's where we see marketing. I'm not too involved in brand. I mean, typically when you've created the PDFs, that stuff has happened all up front. But marketing, definitely.
And I guess that also points to where the accessibility community may be looking for allies that it may not have thought of before necessarily, that the marketing may be the people to connect to in terms of who we're working with today on the conference. So from your point of view, Caroline, who is calling you in? Is it the accessibility person, or is it the marketing people? Is it a bit of both? How does it fit together when you're working inside an organization?
Yeah, it's oftentimes the accessibility team that they're really looking for trusted providers that can help their organization succeed. And they're often the ones to make connections into the organization. Say, well, you should really talk to product, or you should talk to marketing, however it works, however they've figured out the different pieces of accessibility. The accessibility team is really key to helping you find the right team to talk to. So I think that relationship is really important. Yeah. And
have you seen the marketing industry around you, the ecosystems, starting to spot the value of this stuff to them and bringing that in? Is it balancing up? Yeah, absolutely, because marketing is trying to get as close as possible to the customer. They're thinking about their customer. They're thinking about the journey. They're paying attention to what are the different channels of communication that we have, social media, the landing page where we're directing people, an ad campaign, the product page. At every stage along that customer journey, there should be accessibility, and there are different teams involved in that. But the marketing team has that really unique perspective of putting the customer really, top of mind and thinking about how can I reach them. So I think that experience of thinking through the customer should make it back into the organization. I think they can really be accessibility champions. And so a final question for each of you in terms of thinking about, I'm going to come from the accessibility side of the coin. How do you get out and talk to the marketing teams? What do you see working? What sorts of, you mentioned ROI, Doug, which sorts of hooks do you think you can throw out there and get people to join in with this? Because it's a constant refrain. We need to work together from the accessibility side. What are the sorts of things that are going to land with the marketing teams?
Metrics. I think metrics, having use cases where you've seen this be successful. But talk in terms of retention, client retention. Talk in terms of the ability to acquire new customers and what that equals. The woman earlier today who spoke, who's an advocate in the UK here, said every dollar spent brings back $10. I mean, that's a very powerful metric, right? And I think that would land better than other nebulous ideas. So I think it'd be powerful.
And in the bank, Craig, in terms of your experience, is it the numbers that win?
No. Numbers always make the conversation easier, but it's not the driving factor. Right. HSBC, obviously driven very much by Marley, and our senior sponsorship is fantastic. But it very much comes down to doing the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing. The video we recently did with Jodie, the viewport and the actual eyes on that video were fantastic. And going out and showing actually people are interested in this. Once again, going back to the metrics, they make a conversation easier. But also, as I said, for us, the argument's already won. But it's very much about how we make it easier. So it's never a question of just going to them with a problem statement. It's going to them with a problem statement and the solution.
Great. Yeah. And presumably that's the case in the stuff you're doing as well, when people say, I don't even know why this alt text needs to be correct. That's
right.
one end. And then I've done some, surely that's okay.
Yeah.
Just showing people the impact of what they're doing.
I think it's about having a strong online presence, because if you're publishing digitally, then your brand is out there 24/7, selling products or a message, and having that strong online presence means you're looking at accessibility. You're thinking about all customers. You're ensuring that all of those channels of communication are working. And that's the way to think about it, is how can I help sell these ideas or these products 24/7? And if you're thinking about metadata and you're thinking about messaging and making sure that people can find your brand, and that if they're on social media, that they are welcome to explore further, then you're setting up strong lines of communication with your customers.
And then going back to the title of the session, the workflows presumably come back from that, because then you're very clear in terms of the point of the goal. Then everybody's got a part to play in that process.
Yeah, I think that working backwards, thinking about your channels, but then working backwards from them is really important, because there may be blockers along the way that you discover. If you want to have an accessible social media presence, start there, find out how you can actually publish and deliver that accessible content, and then work it back from there. What team was involved in publishing it? What system is being used? Are you using a social media scheduler? Does that scheduler support alt text? Is it enabling you to add captions and publish that way? Or is that the blocker right there? And I think that what you'll discover is there are a lot of reasons why we have inaccessible content on the web, and it's because these issues have not been solved along the workflow.
Cool, thank you. Well, I am 29 seconds ahead of schedule.
Wow.
It's a win. Thank you so much. I think this is starting to sort of segue into what we do in an accessibility conference, isn't it? It sounds quite the same as the stuff we've been doing, and we're trying to bring those two worlds together. I think that workflow stuff is what we're all doing all the time. It's also hearing about the carrot and the stick and understanding the metrics and the value of getting it right. But equally, what can be done at each stage is not always obvious. You need to work backwards, I think. I think that's very clearly part of that communication and relationship building with the people in other parts of the organisation that we all need to do. So hopefully that's been helpful in terms of showing that picture of how we can do it well. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.